If you're designing an AI, like a large language model, the goal is scale-invariant semantic coherence. Each scale, such as letters, words, and sentences, act in complement to the higher and lower scales to preserve meaning, as in letters making coherent words, words forming coherent sentences, sentences forming coherent paragraphs, and paragraphs forming coherent conversations with the user. There are two types of loss that diverge models from this ideal equilibrium. You can experience upward scale loss, in which the higher level meaning, such as what is being communicated in paragraphs, is richer than what the training data really supports, resulting in confabulation and hallucination, well-communicated nonsense. You can also experience downward scale loss, in which the higher level data actually constrains the token data too much, resulting in repetitive text or limitation to a particular persona, poorly communicated reason. This downward and upward loss of coherence also corresponds to the scale levels of biological autopoietic coherence discussed by Maël Monteville, as mentioned in my previous video. Higher scales of biology constrain the possible states of lower scales. For example, the state of the spine and rib cage limits the movement of the organs within you. The structure of each organ limits the movement of the organ parts within them, etc., down to the cells. Even the cells constrain the state of the cell parts within. Too much constraint and the internal operations are choked to death, as with immune disorders. Too little constraint and the system goes off into wild and dangerous directions, as in the case of tumor growth. The stability of the psyche provides a third example of this layered entropy regulation pattern. High-level delusions, such as caused by schizophrenia, can produce beautiful but often meaningless and ungrounded creative works, much like the hallucinations of AI models. Barriers against abstract thought, reflective of a purely mechanical worldview as often associated with autism, can produce coherent, though often boring and uninspiring creative works, much like the downward scale loss in AI models. These examples should help illustrate an overarching pattern of how the world, the mind, and the body all attempt to maintain coherence of information processing across all scales, and the two fundamental patterns of decoherence that occur, downward and upward. A practical application of this schema is the analysis of layers of social identity. For example, if identity at a national scale is losing coherence, it's important to note whether the higher scale, the global identity scale, is being too constraining and preventing expression at the national scale, as with the harsh enforcement of global cultural standards, or being too loose and not supporting the compartmentalization of national cultural standards, as with the non-enforcement of national borders and boundaries. The resulting loss of national coherence of identity prevents meaningful entropy regulation to occur at the national scale, inevitably leading to a collapse of the whole system. The national scale is the bridge between the global scale and more grounded lower scales, such as states, communities, and families, and with its destruction comes a complete decoupling of the entropy regulation at the global scale from grounded reality, turning the system back into a primordial chaos from which new entropy regulating identity structures may emerge. You can think of these layers as cultural narratives. You, as an individual, have a narrative. Your family has a narrative. Your community, your state, your nation, and our whole globe all have narratives about how to live. In other words, how to regulate entropy. If those at the bottom scales have incompatible narratives with those at the higher scales cannot provide stability for the lower scales. If you're not on the same page with the government on how to live, the government is going to have a much harder time helping you live. The lower scales are constrained by the higher scales, but it is just as important for the higher scales to be informed by the lower scales. We may have a grand global vision for the future, but if that vision is not informed by the grounded realities experienced by the lower scale identities, the communities and the families, it will become delusional and ungrounded. Thus, it is of great importance for these lower scales to be allowed to express the reality they are actually experiencing. The will of the people is necessary for the authority of the state to have any groundedness in reality, and the authority of the state is necessary for the will of the people to serve any higher common purpose.